She is a masterful and compassionate teacher. For many years, she is highly respected as an international advocate for an innovative way of expressing yoga and its subtle uses for spiritual growth and complete healing. Educated by masters in India and worldwide, she was a monastic disciple of Sri Swami Satchidanandaji for over 20 years. Developing the yoga portion of the landmark research is pioneering yoga for life-threatening diseases. Dean Ornish's program for reversing heart disease and commonweal cancer health program culminated in the creation of her Yoga of the Heart certification course for teachers and health professionals. Additionally, she created Healing Relationships, a yoga therapy training to enhance intuition and assessment skills for yoga therapists. Passionate about the field of yoga therapy, a series of online classes were created to allow therapists to further their knowledge in different aspects of healing. And Nischala has 2 new books, The Namaste Effect, Expressing Universal Love Through the Chakras, and Meditation in the Yoga Tradition. So, wow, a lot of experience right there. Nischala, would you mind starting us off with maybe a couple ohms? And a little excerpt from your book as well. You said you'd be up for reading to us.
Yeah. So wonderful to be here. Even though I can't see all of you, I can feel you on some level. And some new friends, some almost friends, and some very, very dear friends from before. I'll give you all a hug. So let's begin with 3 ohms. And then I'd like to read you Mahatma Gandhi's definition of Namaste. Please take in a deep breath. Namaste. I honor the place within you where the entire universe resides. I honor the place within you of love, of light, of truth, of peace. I honor the place within you where, when you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, there is only one of us. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you. Beautiful. Mahatma Gandhi.
So what is that place that he's referring to?
Well, that place is deep in our hearts. That's where the light of the divine self dwells. We're told that over and over and over again. And by loving, by opening our hearts, what happens is we begin to understand this namaste, this bringing of everything together, complete, total. And when we meet people with that reverence, that love, magic happens. And when we close our hearts and meet people from a very power-centered place, we see other things happening that maybe are not as sweet. So bringing that together, that namaste. And it's interesting right now, this has become more of a greeting because people can't shake hands or they can't hug now. So I've been teaching everybody who knows nothing about namaste, oh, I like that. You even see it now on television. They're all walking on and they're going like this. So everybody now is feeling the need for that union, that oneness, that recognizing my heart and your heart are the same. We're all one in that place. That's the namaste effect.
So is that true? Are we all one?
I think so. Don't you?
I do.
I think we're all one. Yeah. But we don't look like one. We look different. I look different than you. My voice is different than you. My language may be different. My skin color may be different. My gender may be different. But that's the outside. Everything else is inside. And that, when we can get through all those layers to that place, to that one flame in our hearts, then we are all one. This makes us different. This makes us the same. So that's why by bringing together the right, the left, the front, the center, the above, the below, and meeting, where do we do this? Right here at the heart. It means I and you are one. Yeah, Namaste. I think we're all one. I think we're becoming more one now than we ever were before. We have things in common now, right?
Right. You realize that in, I think, especially emergency situations, that we're all connected and we all count on each other, for so many things. I mean, what we can do collectively is so much more than what anyone could do on their own. But it seems to me on a psychological level, we've been very caught in the practice of comparing ourselves and kind of a competition between humans. How do I rank to other people around me? So in a way, this awareness or belief or knowledge that we're all connected, it's a new playing field. And I think it feels different for many of us. So my question is how do we move into that if we've been kind of living in the self-conscious, comparing myself to other people type of field for a long time?
That's a great question. We needed something to shake us up. That was the only thing. In fact, I saw a very interesting little, I don't know, vignette, I guess you would call it, the other day, and it started out and it showed empty streets. And the commentator said, Mother Nature has said to us, go to your room and think about what you've done and don't come out until you figure that out. And I thought to myself, yeah, we all need a timeout. We give it to kids, right? If they're naughty or they're bouncing off the walls or something like that, we say, okay, go to your room and take a time out and think about what you've done and then come back out. But sometimes as adults, we don't do that. So it's almost like we have to go in again and make this change and think about what is important to us. I think that's the thing. We're so caught up in the externals that we forget what's important to us. And we have to take that time to go in once again. And I think that's the people that we're talking to today, all of you out there, do this. You take time every day and go inside. Most people don't. Most people don't. And this is why we're getting into the struggles that we're getting into, the people that don't like this person or don't like that person. Instead, going back into the heart, they're my brother, they're my sister, they're my mother, they're my father. We start to see them in a very different way. It's not other, it's me. It's not someone out there. And all the scriptures tell us this in various ways, through stories, through everything like that. But may I share a little story?
Sure.
I actually put it right in the front of the book because I think it was one of the turning points in my life. I was being trained in medicine at the time, working in a hospital. And I think I was second year, I can't remember exactly. And I was on the floor doing things with patients at that point. And I was called in to do a particular procedure on this woman. And I walked in and she was lying obviously in bed and 6 months pregnant. And I looked at her and I started to do whatever I was doing. And I looked into her eyes and I looked and I said to her, are you okay? And she went, no. And tears started to come down her face. So immediately I put my instruments aside. I got in bed with her, put my arms around her, held her, and she started talking about how sad she was. She had cancer and she was pregnant and she had all these children at home. And it was just a very namaste moment. The two of us, who had never seen each other before that moment, were wrapped in each other's arms, sobbing, sharing in this grief that she had and what she was holding. And I could see it was a release for her. It was someone she could finally talk to. And then suddenly I hear my name being called on the loudspeaker. Come immediately, come immediately. I went, oh my goodness, what did I do? So I quickly said, I'm sorry, I have to go. And I went and took my little cart and went off and went to the supervisor's office. Boy, was she angry. What were you doing? Where were you? I said, I was in room 603 with the person and she's very upset because and I started to talk. That's not your problem, she said. I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? You shouldn't be in there. That's not your job. And I looked at her and I said, whose job is it? Isn't it the person that who sees it? And she said, if you do that again, I'm going to dismiss you from the program. And at that moment, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to live seeing this person as other, or the next person, or the next person. I wanted to see them as myself. And to me, that's really what medicine is about. That's really what healing is about, is touching your heart to another person's heart and merging. The two softness get together and they just merge together. And we know also scientifically that if you take one heart cell from one person that's beating in a different way, say bleep, 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 and then you take it from another person, but maybe it's going bleep, 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 and you put them together and actually touch them. For one moment, they both cease beating, and then they start again in the same rhythm. So if you touch with another person's heart, you're really melding with them. You're really becoming them, and they are becoming you in that higher sense that we talk about of becoming one. And that's why when I hug, it's always left side to left side, always touching heart to heart, because then you get that effect.
Is this something we can practice doing, or for yourself? Like, is it something that, do you think you've gotten more comfortable just being with another person? I could say for myself, when there are those situations, the first thought many times is, how can I help solve their problem, right? And then now I have interest moving away from that, where that is not even the question, where I don't need to solve any problem, just to be with that person, just to connect our hearts in the way that you described doing with that person. So is that something that we can practice doing that?
I think that would be one of the best practices you could do, Avi. I think that there's enough doing in this world. It's time to be, and just be present with someone. Some of the most amazing counseling sessions I've ever done with people is they come in, they start talking. I'm sitting there, I'm open-hearted, open-eared, listening to them. And then after half hour or whatever it is, I haven't said one word. They look at me and they say, thank you so much. You've helped me so much. And then they walk out, right? Because what happened? They knew what they needed. I was just there to be an open-hearted receptacle for them to be able to speak their truth. And I think that's what we need to do for each other. I don't need more advice. I've got books. I've got all kinds of lectures. I've studied with the greats. I don't need any more of that. What I just need is someone to listen to me, to feel me, to see me as I am. And I think that's the greatest gift we can give anyone.
It reminds me of something I heard you say about meditation, that we consider sitting down and meditating as doing nothing, that we're doing nothing. But I think the point that you made is that actually more is happening in those moments than is normally happening. Can you explain that a little bit?
I'm not sure it can be explained well, but what I named it sort of explains it. I call it a dynamic stillness, because that to me is what it is. You're in stillness, but it's not that nothing is happening. What is happening is you are moving in, and in. And when you do, all those layers that we talked about of identification, of who I am, what I look like, how old am I, what gender am I, all that starts to fade away. And what we're left with is the essence of who we are in our hearts. And when we experience that, this to me is the crux of it. When we experience that, if you really go into deep meditation, you are never the same when you return. There's something that's changed just a little bit. It's just gone click. There's a very nice example that I love to use from the space and aeronautics field. And that is when a rocket ship takes off, it goes straight up and it gains what we call altitude, right? It gains altitude, it goes up. But then once it gets in orbit, it starts to go into what we call as attitude, which I think is so amazing. And that attitude shows us something. If there's a window and I look out and I see the moon from the rocket ship, I said, wow, look at the moon. And then all of a sudden the attitude changes, the moon is gone, right? So to me, it's a lot like that when you go into deep meditation. What happens is you have an attitude change. You now see things in a different way that you never saw them before. You experience them, you feel them, and your life changes. Instead of looking at someone and saying, how dare they say that to me? You look at them and think, maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe something happened to them to make them like that. Because that's not their true nature. Because now you've touched your true nature and you know that everybody has the same true nature. So it's an attitude change in the big sense of attitude. Yeah.
And sometimes I think we have those experiences, or we might have those experiences in deep meditation. And I agree with you that nothing is ever the same. There is a shift. At the same time, the kind of the old patterns and habits are very strong, right? And sometimes it feels, okay, I went to this deep place. I had such a powerful experience. Like nothing is ever going to be the same again. And all that other stuff is gone. And then the other stuff comes back again. And could be a little bit confusing, right? And we feel bad about it, that I got caught in that thing again.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that happening?
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you garden at all?
Not really, no.
Not really, okay. No. But you know about gardening, right?
Sure, it's all around me.
Say it's the spring now, and we go out and you have a little backyard and you decide, okay, I'm gonna plant a nice apple tree, right? So we go and we get just a little tiny tree. I don't know if you can see me, little tiny tree, and we dig a hole and we put it in and put some nice soil and everything like that and cover it back up. And then we walk away and we don't do anything for 2 months. What will happen to the tree? Probably die, right? So it's the same with an experience. Once you've had that experience, first of all, what I would say, if you've had it and you come out, write it down, and not on a computer, by hand, because it gets more into the brain and more habit when you're actually using writing or printing, whatever you do. And then begin to cultivate that attitude. Remember it, because for the first couple of days, it will be strong. And then it will start to fade like everything else. And we have to keep bringing it back. Oh, wait a minute. I thought that about that person. That's my old thinking. That's not how I think now. This is how I think now. They're not just a grumpy old man. They're actually probably hurt. Maybe their bones hurt. Maybe they had an issue with their daughter or son, or somebody said something to them. So you start to then move out of the persona that you created to defend yourself. Really, when we talk about chakras, really that's Manipura. It's me, I, me, mine. But when we start moving up into Anahata, we start realizing that there is no I, me, and mine. It's us. We're all in this together. And then the us becomes one again. We're all one. But it's a cultivation. It's not something that just the light switch goes on and you say, okay, I'm done with all that. Maybe a few people can say that. But generally, it's something that we keep cultivating and saying, reminding ourselves, wait a second, that's not how I think anymore. That's the old way of thinking. So it's a complete cultivation, and that becomes your sadhana then. Remembering. That's one of the most important things. That to me is what Vairagya really is. When you talk about Vairagya, people talk about it as non-attachment, detachment, all that. To me, it's not that. It's remembering the self at all times. Because Vairagya means without color. No color exists. No prejudice exists. No thoughts coloring it in any way. We're back to the pure, clear light when we talk about Vairagya. Remembering the self, no matter what is happening, no matter if people are saying good things to you or insulting you, remember the self at all times. Yeah. And of course, that's matched with abhasya, the constant practice, the devoted practice. Yeah.
Do you think it's important to keep a feeling of lightness and joy with our practice, as opposed to maybe more of a reprimanding type of voice with the self? I have to remember to do that. I have to do it again, right? There's the practice, and then there's our relationship with the practice too, right?
Right, absolutely. And then you get back to the carrot and the stick, right? So who are you? Now, there are people that I know and have talked to all around the world that believe that if you don't suffer, you're not getting anything. You're not, because I think what happens if they take it to the suffering point and then they see joy, they think, oh, see, this came from that. But to me, that's not how it works. To me, I want to embrace joy throughout the entire time. And if the mind is cranky that day, it's okay. You can deal with crankiness too. The crankiness doesn't mean the joy isn't below it. You know, it's a little bit like sometimes you get those things that you have to scratch off and see if you want a prize, and it's underneath. Well, to me, the crankiness is the thing you have to scratch off sometimes, and then underneath is the prize. So it's just something that happens in that particular way. And I don't think we need to be hard on ourselves, but there are people that they make it a chore instead of a joy. And to me, the day that my practices are no longer joyful, I don't know if I'll be able to get myself to it, because that's why I do it. When I sit down, it makes me feel like, oh, I've come home. Here I am again. I'm home again. And it helps me remember. And then I get up and try to remember during the day also. It doesn't always happen. Something happens and you forget who you are. And then you look up and I see green Tara or white Tara. And it reminds me, oh yes, okay, that's who I am.
Is there a correlation between the amount that we can have compassion for ourselves and our ability to have compassion for others?
You mean, is there like a top-off point?
Meaning, like, if I don't really have much compassion for myself and what I'm going through internally, is it still possible to have genuine compassion for others?
I think it's more difficult. It's more difficult. There was a very famous rabbi who said, compassion for thyself is the highest compassion. So how would you know how to have compassion for somebody if you don't have it for yourself? How would you know how to do that? It's like love. It's the same thing. Self-love. If I don't love myself, how can I really love someone else? I may be able to express it. I may be able to show it by giving them things, but to completely give of yourself, I think you have to have a sense of love, or what we're calling now self-esteem, right? We have to have a certain level of that to be able to relate to other people in a loving way, because there's different forms of love. There's selfish love, there's altruistic love, there's unconditional love. So I think that when we talk about it, especially from the heart chakra, a heart chakra is not a selfish love. It's always a compassionate love for everyone in that broader sense, but in the deepest sense. So I don't think we need to beat ourselves up. And I see a lot of people do that, and I'm not sure that's necessary. It's not my style. I'm more of the carrot. I like the sweetness along the way rather than a stick. If I get hit with a stick, it's not a good thing. So I don't do that to myself. I don't. Now, when I first started the practice, probably I was a lot harder on myself. But as the time went on, I saw and I went back to something my mother used to tell me all the time. She would always tell me, you can get more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. And I still remember that, because I think that's for myself too. If I'm kind to myself, if I'm compassionate to myself, then the next person that comes along, I'm that way to them.
And is there a kindness to related to our general outlook on life? Like, is this life experience a fun experience? Is it an opportunity for me? Does that in itself like create this sweetness? And then when maybe I take missteps or I'm not, in my higher self, it could just be like, oh, all right, I did that again. Isn't it fun to learn?
Well, that's exactly. And that's where I think having a good, healthy sense of humor really comes in with this. Because if you can't laugh at how ridiculous life is, then you're going to cry. It's really the only choices. You either laugh or you cry. And sometimes people think I'm a little bit irreverent even because I laugh at things. But it's just, it's preposterous, some of the things that happen to us. And even when I was doing the Commonwealth Cancer Program, which most people don't think cancer is a joke. Most people think it's pretty serious, but we would laugh all the time. And we would tell these ridiculous jokes that on the outside, people would be horrified. Why are you saying things like that? But if you don't keep that levity and that beauty and that joy, what's the use? There's that beautiful expression that says, God respects me when I work, but loves me when I sing. And it's that same kind of thing. You just sing it. If you're feeling really bad, sing it like an opera. And it just helps dispel that. Now, are there times when you just want to go in the corner and cry? Absolutely. And should we do that? I think so. I think it's a really important thing to do too, because we're a gamut of emotions. We're not just one or two. And expressing it, and then you feel better. I even said that the other day. I said, all this is getting to me. I'm going to watch a sad movie and cry and then feel better afterwards. And I did. And then I was back to my joyful self again. So it's up to us to decide, do we want to stay in that place or not? The circumstances will vary constantly, and the circumstances will be sometimes great and sometimes not great. Sometimes you're in the company of a saint. Sometimes you're in the company of less than a saint. But who were you in the midst of that? And I think that's the important thing. Is it worth it to you to give up your sense of joy? Or do you keep it at all costs? And that's the question I always ask myself. Am I moving closer to my joy or further away? And if it's further away, then I have to make an adjustment, because I like the feeling of being joyful. It's an expansive feeling rather than a contracted. And sometimes we need to contract. Sometimes we just need to go in, figure out what's going on in there. Is it me? Is it the world? Is it him? Is it her? And then you make a decision. Okay, now I come back out. So I think it's always an in-out, but the discriminating facility using, yes, but more so the intuition. How do I do this? How do I live in this world being sensitive and loving when some are not? It's my choice, and I'm going to live that way. It's up to us, how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this, kind of the way I see it, the relationship maybe between the mind and our feelings, our intuition, right? And to me, they both have a place. Even the mind can help remind me to feel, right? And they can be partners in a way. But an example of how maybe the mind can go like a little too far, I think, is in, the relationship that we have to words and the labels that we play on ourselves. So, for example, if we label, I'm a depressed person, you say, I'm depressed. And therefore, okay, you have a moment of depression, like what you're talking about. And then you come out of it and have a joyful experience, but you say, oh, no, I'm depressed. I labeled myself, as depressed, as opposed to just this intuitive feeling like I am, how could I even label myself? I'm changing all the time.
Right. Yep. And that you just described beautifully the Namaste, right? The emotions and feelings and the mind. So when they come together, we have this unity. So the question I guess I would ask is, you've heard the expression that you cannot serve two masters because you will love one and hate the other. So the question is, if you have the mind and the emotions or the feelings or the intuition, which are a little different chakras, but we'll just lump them together for now, who's the boss, right? Who is the default? When you're saying, you two are saying different things, who am I going to go with? That's what you have to make the decision. Because if you're going to always go with the mind is going to do what the mind does. It's going to judge. It's going to get you into all kinds of things. And I think the mind is fun if it's not your boss. So all the time you have to keep, okay, when I have an intuitive thought or an intuitive feeling or a cognitive thought, I weigh them. And then I say, okay, which one is appropriate right now? Which one is number one? Which one backs that number one up? And I think that's the way. You don't dismiss the mind. The mind is very important. But what you want to do is put it in its place and make sure it understands that you're taking the information, but you're using it in a very different way. And we had this with the cancer and heart disease. People would always say, I'm a heart patient. I'm a cancer patient. And I'd look at them and say, no, you're not. You're a divine being whose body has cancer. You're a divine being whose body has heart disease. You're not the disease. That's the body. So that was a huge part of it, trying to get people to not identify with the physiology, the pathology, or the pathology in the mind. If I keep saying I'm a depressed person, there's no chance of me getting out of it. I'm going to be depressed. That's what depression does. But if I say my mind today is experienced depression, it moves it away from us a little bit, because you may still have it, but don't own it. I am depressed. My mind is having a depressed day. I'm going to see if I can get my mind out of it. What can I do? So you're seeing the mind almost as a separate entity, and you're working with it to help it, as if it would be a client or a student. You're helping it get out of that depression. So you're seeing it separately. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And it makes me think too of being and just coming to a place where being is enough, right? Like I have this inner dialogue with myself, which I'll question it. Is being enough? And I need to remember in the mind, and that's how the mind can kind of help me when I reaffirm that conclusion that actually being is enough. But it's tricky because I feel that there's been so many influences that have been imposed on me that, you know, you need to be, you know, have strong ambitions and very goal oriented and all of that. And I think ambitions and goals can be okay, but if you turn them around and say, okay, I have ambition to just be, and to simply be, and to trust in that's actually just enough. Yeah.
Aren't we named that? Human beings? But I always say we're human doings. We're not human beings. We're do-dos. We just do all the time. And taking that time to just be, what a concept. But most people think it's wasting time if you just sit there. There's a wonderful little vignette about the great artist, Claude Monet. And he was sitting by his lily pond one day and just looking out at it. And someone walked by and they said to him, oh, you're resting. And he said, no, I'm actually working. And then they came by later that afternoon and he was standing at his easel painting. And they said, now you're working. He said, no, now I'm resting.
I love that. I love that.
So that's, we were oriented, we're goal oriented in the West. Do this, do this, do this, do this, complete this. Did you complete that? Did you finish that? And yet there's a whole other part of us that maybe we just like to sit and stare at something for a little bit. I know I get my best ideas after meditation because my mind is clear. And I go and I say, oh, this is how I can do it. I might have gone in with a problem and I come out with a solution, because just taking that time to clear away everything else helps us get deep within. Yeah, at least that's my experience of it, and many other people too. Because the world will try to take you in one direction. It was funny. I'm in Arizona, and it's this week it's cooler, but it started to get very hot last week. And in order to get any kind of physical exercise, you have to go out pretty early in the morning or after sunset. But that early morning for me is a very precious time where I do my spiritual practices. It's the quiet time of the day. So I have a friend that I walk with sometimes, and she said, okay, we need to go now at 6. I said, I don't want to go at 6 because I do my practices. She's not involved in any of this. And she did her best to try to talk me out of it. Well, can't you do it later? Can't you do it another time? Can't you do? And I finally looked at her and I said, this is my life stream. This is where I get my energy and inspiration and remember who I am every day. Exercise has to take a second to that. And she just went, oh, okay, and walked away. So I think that sometimes there's even good people that want good things for us, but they're trying to distract us. And we have to be so clear that this is something that is most important. It's my spiritual food. It's my eating. Yeah.
Thank you.